What's the dumbest thing that almost destroyed you? My only shot at college was a full-ride scholarship that required perfect attendance senior year. Not one single absence, even with a doctor's note. I went to school with strep throat, the flu, and pink eye that year. I threw up in the bathroom between classes and came back after lunch. I sat through presentations with migraines so bad I couldn't see straight. Other kids with the scholarship did the same. This whole group of us dragging ourselves through the hallways like zombies, terrified of losing our futures to a sick day. My friend lost her scholarship when her mom kept her home for a family funeral. Another guy lost his when his car broke down and he couldn't get there. The principal always said the same thing. Rules are rules, no exceptions. I'd developed a whole system for staying functional while sick. Prescription strength painkillers from when I'd had my wisdom teeth out, energy drinks to stay upright, changes of clothes in my locker for when fevers made me sweat through shirts. My teachers knew about the scholarship requirements and would let me put my head down or leave for the bathroom without asking questions. They felt bad for us, but couldn't change the rules. I'd made it through 7 months without missing a single day. My parents thought I was insane, but they also knew we couldn't afford college without this scholarship. My dad had been laid off twice in 3 years, and my mom's medical bills from her cancer treatment had destroyed their credit. This scholarship was literally the only way I wasn't going to be stuck in our dying factory town forever. Some mornings, my mom would look at me shaking with fever at the breakfast table and start to say something, then stop herself because we both knew what was at stake. The closest call had been in February, when I got food poisoning from the cafeteria fish sticks. I spent the entire day running to the bathroom every 20 minutes, clutching a trash can during calculus, sipping Gatorade to stay hydrated enough to remain conscious. The nurse wanted to send me home, but I begged her not to call my parents. She let me lie on the cot between classes, setting timers so I wouldn't miss the bell. That night, I cried from relief that I'd made it through without breaking the rule. The pain started during third period on a Tuesday in April. At first, I thought it was just cramps or maybe something I ate, but by lunch, it felt like someone was stabbing me with a hot knife in my lower right side. I could barely walk to fifth period, and when I tried to sit down, the pain was so intense, I actually screamed. The teacher took one look at my face and called the nurse immediately. The nurse did a few tests, pressed on my stomach, and went pale when I almost passed out from the pain. She called my parents and said the word I'd been dreading all year, appendicitis. I needed to go to the emergency room immediately. If my appendix burst, it could kill me. I begged her to let me finish the school day, just 3 more hours. I'd have surgery after final bell. She looked at me like I was insane and said she was legally required to call an ambulance if my parents didn't come immediately. My mom arrived in 15 minutes, and I spent the entire ride to the hospital sobbing and begging her to take me back to school. I told her I'd have the surgery tonight, tomorrow morning, any time except during school hours. The pain was making me delirious, but all I could think about was the scholarship evaporating with every mile between me and school. My mom kept saying the principal would understand, that emergency surgery was obviously an excused absence, that no one would hold a medical emergency against me. At the hospital, while they were prepping me for surgery, I made my mom promise to call the principal and explain everything. I made her take pictures of me in the hospital bed with all the monitors attached as proof. The surgeon said my appendix was hours from rupturing, and I was lucky we'd caught it in time. I went under anesthesia, still mumbling about perfect attendance. I woke up from surgery to find my mom sitting beside my bed, and the first thing I asked was if she'd talked to the principal. She smiled and said everything was fine, that he'd said to focus on recovering and not worry about anything. I spent 2 days in the hospital and another 3 at home recovering, my mom assuring me the whole time that the principal had been very understanding. Monday morning, I walked into the principal's office with my hospital discharge papers and surgical notes, ready to return to class. He looked up from his computer with this sympathetic expression that made my stomach drop. "I'm so glad you're feeling better," he said, then pulled out a letter from his desk drawer. "But you understand that perfect attendance means perfect attendance, right? The scholarship committee has already been notified of your absence." I felt sicker than I had in the hospital. My legs went numb, and I had to grab the edge of his desk to keep from falling over. The letter in my hand started shaking so bad, I couldn't read the words anymore. Principal Dorsey kept talking about how the policy had been clear from the start, and how they'd made no secret of the requirements. His mouth was moving, but all I heard was this rushing sound in my ears like I was underwater. The surgical incision on my stomach started burning, and I pressed my hand against it through my shirt. He pushed a box of tissues across the desk, but I couldn't move to take one. My vision got blurry, and I realized I was crying without making any sound. The room tilted, and I stumbled backward into the chair behind me. Dorsey stood up and came around the desk, asking if I needed water or the nurse. I shook my head and tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't work right. The letter fell from my hand and floated to the floor. I bent to pick it up, and the room spun so hard I had to put my head between my knees. Dorsey's hand touched my shoulder, and I jerked away so fast I almost fell out of the chair. I grabbed the letter and shoved it in my pocket, then pushed myself up using the armrests. My whole body was shaking like I had a fever. I turned toward the door but had to stop and lean against the wall. Dorsey said something about understanding how disappointed I must be, but I just kept walking. The hallway stretched out forever in front of me. I made it about 10 feet before my stomach cramped so hard I doubled over. I stumbled into the bathroom and barely made it to a stall before throwing up. My body shook so bad I had to hold onto the toilet to stay upright. The incision felt like it was ripping open again, even though I knew it wasn't. I threw up again, then dry heaved when nothing was left. My legs gave out, and I ended up sitting on the dirty bathroom floor with my back against the stall wall. The door opened, and I heard Mom's voice calling my name. She must have been waiting in the parking lot. Her shoes appeared under the stall door, and she knocked softly. I couldn't answer, so she pushed the door open and found me there on the floor. She knelt down and pulled me against her, not caring about the gross floor or anything. She kept saying we'd figure something out. We'd find another way, but we both knew knew there wasn't another way. She helped me stand up and walked me to the sink to rinse my mouth. My reflection looked like a ghost. We went out to her car, and I slumped in the passenger seat while she drove home. At lunch, I told her I needed to call the scholarship office myself. She handed me her phone, and I sat in my car in the driveway dialing the number from the paperwork. The automated system made me press about 12 different numbers before putting me on hold. I listened to the same 30-second music loop over and over for 20 minutes. Finally, it said all representatives were busy and transferred me to voicemail. The voicemail box was full. I hung up and called again. Same music, same message, same full voicemail. I tried 4 more times with the same result. My phone battery died on the 6th attempt. I went back to the school for afternoon classes because what else was I supposed to do? Every step made my incision ache, but I forced myself through the hallways. Kids stared and whispered when they saw me. Word had already spread about the scholarship. In every class, I had to sit carefully to avoid pulling the stitches. My AP history teacher stopped me after class and said how sorry she was about everything. She said it wasn't fair and she wished she could help. I nodded and walked away because sorry didn't pay tuition. My English teacher said the same thing. So did my calculus teacher. They all had these sad looks like I died or something. That night, Dad came home with a folder full of papers. He spread them across the kitchen table, showing me bank statements and bills. The mortgage was 3 months behind because of his unemployment. Mom's chemo bills were still coming in, even though she'd finished treatment 6 months ago. The credit cards were maxed from keeping us afloat. He showed me the math, how even with him working again, we were barely making minimum payments. The scholarship money would have covered everything for 4 years. Without it, there was no money for application fees, much less tuition. We sat there staring at the papers until Mom started crying. The next afternoon, I went to my room and started gathering documents. I found the hospital admission form with a timestamp showing when I arrived, the surgeon's operative notes describing the emergency procedure, the discharge papers stating I'd had life-threatening appendicitis. Mom had taken photos of me in the hospital bed with all the monitors and IV tubes. I printed everything and organized it into a folder. My hands shook as I paper-clipped sections together. Maybe if I showed them enough proof, they'd make an exception. There's something really strange about this scholarship having such a harsh rule. I wonder who decided that missing school for emergency surgery doesn't count as an exception. The principal seems way too calm about destroying this kid's entire future over a burst appendix, which makes me think there's more to this policy than we're seeing right now. The discharge summary specifically said emergency surgery and life-threatening condition in bold letters. I highlighted those parts with a yellow marker. That evening, I texted my friend who'd lost her scholarship for the funeral. She replied right away saying she'd tried to appeal 3 times. Each time they said no exceptions meant no exceptions. She was working at Target now, taking community college classes when she could afford them. She said the committee didn't care about individual situations, just their statistics. Her last text said they treated us like numbers, not people. Wednesday morning, I sat at my computer typing an email to Principal Dorsey. I attached scans of all my medical documents. I wrote about how I'd never missed a day before this, how I'd come to the school sick all year to keep my attendance perfect. I deleted it and started over, trying to sound less desperate. The 3rd version was more professional, but still begged for reconsideration. The 4th version included quotes from the policy about medical emergencies. The 5th version referenced other schools that had exception processes. The 6th version was short and direct, just asking for a meeting to discuss options. My finger stayed over the send button for a full minute before I finally clicked it. 2 days later, I went to the guidance office to follow up. The secretary barely looked up from her computer when I explained why I was there. She clicked through her calendar and said there was an opening in 3 days. She printed an appointment slip and handed it to me without making eye contact. I'd become just another problem in her busy day. When the meeting day came, I sat across from guidance counselor Leah Emerson in her tiny office. She pulled out a thick binder and showed me the actual state policy. 12 pages of legal language that basically said the scholarship funding was tied to attendance rates. If they made exceptions, they'd lose the state money for the whole program. She explained how the district's hands were tied by regulations they didn't create. Her voice was kind, but every word crushed what little hope I had left. Leah flipped to another section and started marking pages with sticky notes while explaining there was still an appeal process that went through the district office first and then to the scholarship committee. She warned me the timeline was tight, maybe 2 weeks before they'd permanently reassign my scholarship to someone on the waiting list. She grabbed a legal pad and started sketching out the steps we'd need to take, offering to help draft the formal appeal, but making it clear she'd seen these fail before when families had tried. I took pictures of every page she marked and wrote down the names of everyone we'd need to contact while my hands shook from a mix of anger and desperation. That evening at home, Mom's face crumpled when I told her what Leah had said about the policy. She covered her mouth with both hands and admitted she'd believed Cameron Dorsey when he called while I was in surgery and said not to worry about anything. Dad's fist came down hard on the kitchen table, making the salt shaker jump, and he walked out without a word. I heard the garage door slam and then the rhythmic thud of him hitting his heavy bag over and over while Mom sat at the table crying. They started arguing about who should have pushed harder for answers, who should have asked more questions, their voices carrying through the thin walls as trust between them started fraying. I left them fighting and went to my room to prepare for my next meeting with the principal. The computer screen blurred as I typed up my main points, printing everything in triplicate and organizing documents into color-coded folders. My incision ached from sitting hunched over the desk, but I pushed through the pain, taking leftover pain pills from the hospital to keep working. I practiced my speech in the mirror until 3 in the morning, trying different tones and approaches, working to not sound as desperate as I felt, even though my voice kept cracking. The next afternoon, I sat across from Cameron Dorsey's desk again, going through my prepared speech, while he nodded at all the right moments with that same practiced warmest sympathy. When I finished my presentation and showed him all my documentation, he slid a thick policy manual across his polished desk and repeated that his hands were tied by district regulations. His voice stayed professionally sympathetic while he destroyed my last hope for a direct solution, explaining how the rules existed for good reasons and couldn't be bent for anyone. I left his office with my folders still perfectly organized but completely useless against the wall of bureaucracy. Leah met me in the library after school to help draft a formal appeal letter to the district superintendent. She had already gotten letters from 3 of my teachers who'd witnessed my dedication all year, each one describing how I'd attended class while obviously sick. We spent hours crafting the perfect wording, making sure to hit all the policy points while still conveying the human cost of their rigid rules. She made calls to her contacts to find out who sat on the review committee and what arguments might work best with each member. We added a request for a temporary hold on reassigning the scholarship while the appeal was pending, though Leah warned me not to get my hopes up about that either. The next morning, I drove back to the hospital and waited 2 hours in the records department to get a detailed note from my surgeon. He wrote that delaying surgery even a few more hours could have resulted in sepsis and death, that my appendix had been on the verge of rupturing when they removed it. The medical assistant made extra copies of everything and gave me a hug, saying the whole situation was insane and she couldn't believe they were punishing me for not dying. I added the surgeon's note to my growing pile of evidence that didn't seem to matter to anyone with actual power. 3 days later, Ian Faulkner from the scholarship committee finally returned my calls after I'd left 12 messages. He explained they relied entirely on the school attendance records for decisions and didn't have authority to override district determinations about absences. He sounded genuinely sorry, but kept repeating that the committee's hands were tied, that they had to follow the rules set by the state education department. Another wall in the bureaucratic maze that seemed designed to prevent any actual human consideration. Leah called me that night with worse news after digging deeper into the policies. The attendance requirement wasn't just for our school, but covered the entire district's scholarship programs, meaning any exception would require approval from the superintendent and the full school board. The problem was bigger and more systemic than we'd realized, affecting dozens of kids across multiple schools who'd lost scholarships for legitimate emergencies. She'd found case after case in the district records, all denied on the same grounds. I started a group chat with other kids I knew who had the scholarship, and within hours, I learned I wasn't alone in this nightmare. 8 other students shared their stories of lost scholarships for court appearances, family emergencies, and medical issues that should have been excused. One girl lost hers when her dad had a heart attack and she rode in the ambulance with him. Another lost his when he testified in court about witnessing a crime. We started documenting all the patterns and comparing notes about how the policy had destroyed our futures over technicalities. That's when Piper Dunn, a local reporter, messaged me after seeing a classmate's social media post about our situation. She wanted to do a story about the scholarship policy and asked if I'd go on record with my experience, saying she'd been investigating the district's attendance policies for months. I stared at her message for 20 minutes, knowing that going public could make things worse with the administration, but also knowing it might be our only shot at real change. The next morning, I got called down to the principal's office during first period. Cameron Dorsey sat behind his desk with his hands folded, waiting for me to sit down before he started talking. He said he'd heard I'd been talking to reporters and wanted to remind me that my college recommendations hadn't been sent yet. He mentioned how important it was for the school to maintain its reputation and how creating negative attention could affect not just me, but future students too. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes were cold as he explained that my final transcripts wouldn't be released until after graduation, and any disciplinary issues could still be added to my permanent record. I sat there with my hands clenched in my lap, nodding like I understood while my stomach churned. He dismissed me with a reminder that the school had been very understanding about my situation already. I walked back to class on shaky legs, knowing he'd just threatened everything I had left. That evening, my phone started blowing up with notifications from classmates, sending me links to a new Facebook page called Justice for Scholarship Students. Someone had posted my whole timeline with screenshots of my hospital discharge papers and the denial letter, all with my name blacked out, but enough details that everyone local knew it was me. The post had already been shared over 200 times, and comments were pouring in faster than I could read them. Some parents wrote about their own kids who'd lost scholarships for car accidents or family emergencies, while others argued that rules existed for a reason, and making exceptions would be unfair to students who'd followed them. By midnight, the post had over 1,000 shares, and local news stations were asking for interviews in the comments. The next few days turned into complete chaos online as the community split down the middle. The principal just threatened this kid's transcripts and recommendations over talking to reporters. That timing feels awfully convenient right after the story starts getting attention. Makes me wonder what else this district might be trying to keep quiet if they're this quick to squeeze a student who's already lost everything. Parents started sharing horror stories about the attendance policy, while others defended the school district's need for standards. Local business owners jumped in, some threatening to pull their sponsorships from the school programs, while others supported the administration. The school's Facebook page got flooded with angry comments until they turned off the ability to post. Teachers started getting harassed in grocery stores by parents on both sides. My mom showed me her phone where her co-workers were arguing about it in their group chat. The whole town was fighting about my appendix. I decided to sign up for public comment at the next school board meeting, filling out the online form with shaking hands. I spent hours writing and rewriting a 2-minute statement, trying to stick to just facts without sounding bitter or angry. I practiced reading it out loud in my room, timing myself to make sure I didn't go over the limit. My voice kept cracking when I got to the part about other kids losing their scholarships scholarships for funerals and emergencies. Mom sat on my bed listening to me practice, tears running down her face. She kept saying she was proud of me for fighting, even though we both knew it was probably too late to change anything. 3 days before the meeting, a thin envelope arrived from the scholarship committee with their official response. The letter thanked me for my dedication to academic excellence and expressed regret about my unfortunate circumstances. They explained that the attendance requirement was clearly stated in all scholarship materials and that making exceptions would undermine the integrity of the program. They wished me luck in my future endeavors and reminded me that many successful people had overcome similar setbacks. I sat on my bed holding that piece of paper, reading those empty words over and over until they blurred together. All those days I dragged myself to the school sick, all those hours studying while burning with fever, all of it meant nothing because my appendix decided to explode. Kennedy Espinoza from the legal aid office called that afternoon to set up a free consultation. We met in a tiny conference room downtown where they explained that our options were limited but not completely hopeless. They pulled out a thick folder of similar cases where students had challenged attendance policies based on discriminatory impact against kids with disabilities or chronic medical conditions. The problem was that these cases took months or years to resolve, way too late to help me with college in the fall. They suggested we could file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights, but warned that the investigation alone could take 6 months. Kennedy shifted tactics, suggesting we focus on documenting everything for a broader challenge to help future students. They wanted to file Freedom of Information requests for all scholarship revocations in the past 5 years to show patterns of arbitrary enforcement. We spent 2 hours going through all my medical records and creating a timeline of every sick day I'd attended school. It wasn't what I wanted, but at least it might stop this from happening to someone else. Meanwhile, things at home kept getting worse as Dad's hours at the warehouse got cut again. The kitchen table disappeared under piles of overdue notices for Mom's medical bills from her cancer treatment. We sat there with a calculator trying to figure out how to pay a college deposit we didn't have for a school I couldn't afford to attend. Dad kept moving numbers around on paper like they might magically add up differently. Mom called the financial aid offices at 3 different state schools, but without the scholarship, even community college would mean massive loans. The numbers never worked, no matter how many times we tried. I picked up evening shifts at a burger place downtown, coming to the school the next morning exhausted and smelling like fryer oil. My grades started tanking, but it didn't matter anymore since the scholarship was gone anyway. I sleepwalked through classes, turning in half-finished assignments and failing quizzes I hadn't studied for. Teachers who used to praise my work started giving me concerned looks. Other kids whispered about how I'd gone from valedictorian track to barely passing. The lunch lady who knew about my situation started slipping extra food onto my tray without charging me. My calculus teacher pulled me aside after class when I failed another test, saying she was worried about me passing the course. She offered extra credit assignments to help boost my grade enough to graduate, explaining that she knew why I was struggling and had written her own letter to the school board about my situation. I took the stack of extra work she handed me, adding it to my impossible pile of things to do between school and work, and trying to fight a system that had already won. The next week, I saw a flyer for prom tickets going on sale and remembered I'd been saving for that since freshman year. I counted the money in my old shoebox under my bed and realized it would cover gas for 2 more weeks of driving to work. A junior from my AP history class had been asking around about buying tickets from seniors who weren't going. I found him at lunch and sold him mine for $50 less than I'd paid in deposits over the years. He asked if I was sure, and I told him I had to work that night anyway. My friends at the next table looked at me weird when I handed over the ticket confirmation, but I just shrugged and said, overtime paid better than dancing. Walking to my locker after 6th period, this kid whose parents were both on the school board stopped me near the water fountain. He said he'd heard about my scholarship thing and that rules were rules, that I should have planned better for emergencies. His dad had apparently been talking about it at dinner, saying the district couldn't make exceptions or everyone would want special treatment. I felt my hands ball up into fists and my jaw clench so hard my teeth hurt. He kept talking about personal responsibility and how his family had never missed a day of anything important. I turned and walked away before I did something that would get me suspended, the anger burning in my chest like I'd swallowed hot coals. Leah found me in the library after school and said she'd been working on something that might help. She'd gathered letters from 5 of my teachers plus the school nurse, all explaining how I'd maintained perfect attendance despite serious illnesses all year. She'd also gotten my surgeon to write a detailed letter about how waiting even a few more hours could have killed me when my appendix was ready to burst. We spent 3 hours putting together a formal appeal package with every document organized and labeled with sticky notes. She'd typed up a cover letter on official school letterhead that she probably wasn't supposed to use, outlining the medical emergency and including copies of my hospital records. We drove to the post office together and sent it certified mail to the superintendent's office, paying extra to get a delivery confirmation. The receipt said they'd get it within 2 business days. 4 days later, a form letter arrived from the district office acknowledging they'd received our appeal. The letter said they had a 30-day review period for all appeals and decisions would be communicated in writing after the review was complete. College deposits were due in 3 weeks and most schools wanted them by May 1st. 30 days might as well have been 30 years. I showed the letter to my parents and my mom started making calls to see if any colleges would give us an extension. Every admissions office said the same thing about deadlines being firm. That Friday, Piper's article about the scholarship policy went live on the school newspaper website. She'd kept me semi-anonymous, just calling me a senior student, but she'd included enough details that everyone knew exactly who it was. She'd interviewed 3 other kids who'd lost scholarships for different attendance attendance reasons and included statistics about how many students the policy had affected over 5 years. The article got shared hundreds of times within hours, and my phone started buzzing nonstop with notifications from people tagging me on social media. Some people supported me, but others said I was just looking for special treatment. Monday morning, I got called to the principal's office where Cameron Dorsey sat with the vice principal looking serious. They said the article and social media attention was creating a disruption to the learning environment. Parents were calling the school complaining about the negative attention. Dorsey said if I continued to make the school look bad, it could affect my ability to participate in graduation ceremonies. The vice principal added that they were considering disciplinary action for encouraging negative publicity about the district. I pulled out my phone and hit record, keeping it in my lap where they couldn't see it. They kept talking about how I needed to think about other students and stop being selfish with my personal problems. Kennedy called me that night and said she'd heard about the meeting from Piper. She'd already started filing formal records requests with the district for all emails and documents about attendance-based funding and scholarship metrics. The district had 30 days to respond, but she said building a paper trail was important, even if it took time. Each request cost $25 in processing fees, but Kennedy said her organization would cover it. She filed 12 different requests that week. 3 weeks later, boxes of documents arrived at Kennedy's office. The records showed the district received bonus state funding based on attendance rates above 95%. Internal emails between administrators discussed the importance of maintaining these metrics for budget reasons. Something feels off about the district getting bonus money for high attendance rates while also having these harsh scholarship rules. The timing of that threat about graduation ceremonies right when the article comes out seems pretty convenient for them. One email chain specifically mentioned that scholarship programs with perfect attendance requirements helped boost overall attendance numbers. Another document showed the district got extra federal grants for having high scholarship completion rates. Kennedy highlighted an email where someone literally wrote that student welfare was secondary to protecting funding streams. She made copies of everything and started preparing a report showing how the policy served the budget instead of students. Cameron Dorsey called me in for another meeting, this time just the two of us in his office. He closed the door and started talking about the greater good and how his job was to protect resources for all students, not just one. He actually used the phrase, "The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few," like we were in some space movie. He said my individual situation was unfortunate, but changing the policy would affect funding that helped thousands of students. He explained how the attendance money paid for textbooks and computers and teacher salaries. He made it sound like I was trying to steal from other kids by asking for an exception. I left his office shaking with rage at how calm he was about destroying my future. My mom noticed I'd been skipping my post-surgery follow-up appointments because I couldn't afford to miss work shifts. She found my appointment cards in the trash and confronted me about it. She dragged me to the doctor that afternoon even though I insisted I was fine. The doctor examined my incision site and said I was showing signs of infection from not resting properly. He prescribed antibiotics and told me I was risking serious complications by not following recovery instructions. I sat in the exam room staring at the wall and realized I was destroying my health trying to save money for a future that was already gone. The next morning, I couldn't get out of bed to go to the school for finals week. My mom found me just lying there staring at the ceiling and asked if I was sick again, but I told her what was the point of even taking the tests. I couldn't afford college anyway, so why bother trying to do well on exams that wouldn't matter for anything? She left my room without saying anything, and 20 minutes later, Leah showed up at my house with her backpack and a box of donuts. She sat on my bed and told me I was being an idiot and that giving up now would make everything worse. She pulled out a notebook where she'd written down exactly which finals I needed to pass to graduate and which ones I could basically sleep through. We spent an hour going through each class, and she showed me the bare minimum I needed to do to keep my grades high enough to get my diploma. She wouldn't let me say I was giving up and kept shoving donuts at me until I agreed to at least show up for the important tests. 3 days later, she dragged me to her house early on a Saturday morning with my laptop and a folder of tax documents my mom had given me. We sat at her kitchen table filling out FAFSA forms while her mom made us pancakes and kept refilling our coffee cups. The numbers on the screen were scary, even for community college, but Leah had already looked up payment plans and work-study programs. She showed me how I could take general education classes at the community college for 2 years, then transfer to a state school to finish a degree. It wasn't the path I'd planned, but it was still a path forward instead of just giving up completely. My mom had packed all our financial information in a manila envelope, and some of the numbers made me feel sick, seeing how little money we actually had. The next week, I drove to the community college campus and filled out an application at the admissions office. The woman behind the desk was nice and helped me sign up for placement tests in math and English that I'd need to take before registering for classes. Walking around the small campus felt like admitting defeat after working so hard for the scholarship to a real university. Leah kept texting me that I was taking control of my situation instead of letting it control me, but it still felt like failure. When I got home, my mom was in the kitchen and she saw the community college folder in my hand and started crying. She kept saying she was sorry they couldn't help me pay for a better school, and I had to tell her it wasn't her fault. 2 weeks later, I sat in the high school auditorium during the school board meeting with my hands shaking, holding 2 pages I'd typed up. Kennedy had helped me write a statement about the scholarship situation and gotten me on the agenda to speak during public comment. When they called my name, I walked to the podium and looked out at the packed room. Half the faces looked supportive and half looked annoyed that I was causing trouble for the district. 3 news cameras were set up in the back, and I could see their red recording lights. Cameron Dorsey sat in the back row with his arms crossed and his jaw tight. My voice shook as I started reading about how the attendance policy had cost me my future. I talked about going to the school sick and how other kids had lost scholarships scholarships for funerals and car trouble. I got through all 2 minutes without crying, even though my legs felt like jelly the whole time. When I sat back down, the room stayed quiet for a few seconds before some people started clapping and others just stared at me. The next day, a letter arrived from Ian Faulkner with the scholarship committee's final decision. They were denying my appeal again, but offered to waive my application fee if I wanted to reapply next year as a generous gesture. The offer was so small compared to losing a full ride that it felt like they were making fun of me. I threw the letter in the trash without bothering to respond, because what was the point of reapplying when I'd already be in debt from a year of community college? At graduation rehearsal the next week, teachers kept coming up to me quietly to say they were sorry about what happened. The divide in the school was obvious, with staff members who thought I got screwed staying on one side of the gym and administrators who were protecting the system staying on the other. Cameron Dorsey stayed far away from me the whole time and wouldn't make eye contact when we practiced the diploma handoff. I just focused on walking in the right line and standing in the right spot so I could get through the ceremony without making a scene. Kennedy called me that afternoon and said she'd connected me with a statewide education advocacy group that wanted to use my case for policy reform. They were playing a long game trying to change laws that I wouldn't benefit from, but maybe other kids wouldn't have to go through this nightmare. I agreed to help with whatever they needed, even though it felt pointless for my own situation. A few days later, Piper published another article in the local paper featuring 3 other students who had lost the same scholarship for similar reasons over the past 5 years. One girl had missed school when her house flooded, and another guy lost it when he got quarantined with mono. The pattern was undeniable now, and the article generated tons of angry comments online. The school district sent out a press release saying they were reviewing the policy, but everyone knew that meant nothing would actually change. When final grades got posted online, I'd managed to pass everything and would officially graduate, even though my GPA had dropped enough that I lost my honors designation. Seeing that lower GPA felt like another punch after everything else, but at least I'd get a diploma. The piece of paper felt hollow, knowing it wouldn't get me into the colleges I'd dreamed about. Graduation day arrived, and I put on my cap and gown like everyone else, even though I felt like a fraud walking across that stage. When they called my name, I had to walk up and shake Cameron Dorsey's hand as he gave me my diploma. I kept the handshake to exactly 2 seconds and stared right into his eyes without smiling or saying anything. He looked uncomfortable and quickly moved on to the next student, which gave me a tiny bit of satisfaction in an otherwise miserable day. The Monday after graduation, I started looking for work and found a job at a warehouse on the edge of town that paid $12 an hour with overtime available most weeks. My first day, I showed up at 5 in the morning and spent 8 hours loading boxes onto trucks until my back screamed and my hands were raw even through the work gloves. That night, I took half my paycheck advance and stuffed the cash into an old pickle jar I'd cleaned out and labeled college with a piece of masking tape. The routine became simple after a few weeks. Wake up at 4, drive to work, load boxes for 8 to 10 hours, drive home, eat whatever was cheapest at the grocery store, sleep, repeat. The jar filled slowly, $20 here, $40 there, sometimes $60 when I got a full week of overtime. I did the math one night and figured out at this rate it would take me 4 years just to save enough for 1 year of state college tuition, not counting books or housing or food. In mid-July, I was eating lunch in the break room when Ian texted me a screenshot from the district website announcing they were revising the scholarship policy to allow medical emergency exemptions starting with next year's seniors. My sandwich turned to cardboard in my mouth as I read the new guidelines that specifically mentioned appendicitis as a covered emergency. The group chat exploded within minutes with Leah saying at least future kids wouldn't suffer like we did, while another kid named Marcus, who'd lost his scholarship to a car accident, was typing in all caps about how we should sue for retroactive application. I felt both things at once, relief that maybe some kid next year wouldn't lose everything over their appendix exploding, but also this deep anger that we were the test cases who had to lose, so the district could learn their lesson. Why would Cameron Dorsey use a Star Trek quote to justify ruining a kid's life? Makes me wonder if he actually believes his own words, or if he's just reading from some administrator script he memorized years ago. Piper kept writing articles about our situation, and in early August, a small community foundation reached out saying they'd read her pieces and wanted to offer me a 1-semester book grant of $500. I accepted immediately and thanked them 3 times in my reply email, even though $500 wouldn't even cover half my books for 1 semester. Every bit helped though, and I added the check to my jar, which was getting heavier, but nowhere near heavy enough. By September, I'd saved enough to enroll in 2 night classes at the community college, Introduction to Psychology and English Composition, both required for any 4-year degree. The warehouse let me adjust my schedule to leave at 3:30 to catch the bus that took 90 minutes each way with all the stops. I did homework under the flickering lights during my lunch break, wrote essays on my phone during the bus ride, studied flashcards while boxes moved down the conveyor belt. My social media feeds started filling up with everyone posting pictures of their dorm rooms and videos from college parties and football games. I muted most of them one by one, not because I was angry at them, but because seeing the life I was supposed to have was like pressing on a bruise that wouldn't heal. Kennedy sent me an email in early October inviting me to speak on a panel about education policy reform at the state capitol, saying my story could help change things for other students. I left it sitting in my inbox for 2 weeks, opening it and closing it without answering because part of me wanted to help, but another part just needed to focus on surviving each day. Walking past the high school after my warehouse shift one afternoon in late October, I noticed a new flyer on the announcement board about the scholarship program that now included medical emergency exemptions in bold letters at the top. I didn't stop to read the details, just kept walking toward the bus stop with my backpack full of textbooks and my hands still still aching from 10 hours of loading boxes. Well, folks, that's all from me today. I really enjoyed spending this time with you all. Catch you in the next one. And hey, like the video, it helps more than you think.